All right. Hello. Greetings, everybody. What's going on? This your girl Tiffany coming through live right here. So please make sure you check out the channel, hit the notification bell, and make sure you subscribe and all that great stuff. So today, I want to talk about Ayubi Suleiman Diallo. Ayubi Suleiman Diallo was a Muslim who happened to be a slave out of Senegambia region. Okay. He was brought to America and he was enslaved in Maryland for 2 years. So before he got his freedom, but unfortunately his life had ended at the age of 72. So we're going to look into his story and his life and how it all transpired and took place. All right, so let me go ahead and get started. All right. So who is Ayubi? Ayubi Suleiman Diallo, also known as Job bin Solomon, was a prominent Muslim enslaved who was transported to the Americas during the Atlantic Slave Trade. Born in Bundu, Senegal, West Africa, Ayuba's memoirs were published as one of the earliest slave narratives. That is a first-person account of the slave trade. In Thomas Bloudet, Some Memories of the Life of Job, the son of Solomon, high priest of Bunda in Africa, who was enslaved about 2 years in Maryland, and afterwards being brought to England, was set free and sent to his native land in the year of 1734. However, this version is not a first-person account. The first-hand account of Ayuba's capture by Mendicus and eventual return home can be found in Francis Moore's Travels into the Interior Parts of Africa. All right. So, as I mentioned before, a lot of the people, or 15-30% of those who were brought here to America was Muslim. Okay, so there's a chance and possibility that many of us got somebody who was of Islamic background that was enslaved here in America. Because if you look into the history about West Africa, Central West Africa, but West Africa in particular, it's predominantly Islamic. So you find predominantly Muslims practicing Islam in those regions, okay? Along with their tribe, African tradition as well. So there's many accounts of Muslims that were brought here in America. And it's not spoken about very often. It's often kept under the rug. Peace, sister. How you doing? It's often kept under the rug. People don't speak much about the Muslims who came here in America and made their contribution and slavery and whatnot. You're not going to hear much about it. All right? You're not going to hear a whole lot about it. But there's a brother that I want you guys to look into. Okay, he's a Muslim. And I will have his information posted at the end of this video. All right. So, but let me go ahead and continue. Now let's look at his biography. It says Diallo came from a prominent Fulbe family of Muslim religious leaders. His grandfather had founded the town of Bundu, and he grew up with Samba Galadio Degui, the heir to the kingdom of Futa Toro. In 1930, Ayuba became a victim of the ever-going slave exploitation of the Senegambia region. Ayuba and his interpreter, Lume Loes, also known as Lame J. Laham Joy, Lahim J, or Lahim Nadaye were near the Gambia River to trade slaves and paper. While visiting some friends on their return trip, Ayuba and Yoaz were captured by invading Mandingos. The invaders shaved their heads to make them appear as war captives and thereby supposedly legitimately enslavable, as opposed to their actual condition of people captured in a kidnapping raid for the specific purpose of selling slaves for financial profit. All right. These two men were sold to factors of the Royal African Company. Now, what is the Royal African Company? Let's look at that real quick. The Royal African Company was an English mercantile company set up in 1660 by the Royal Stuart family and City of London merchants to trade along the west coast of Africa. It was led by the Duke of York, who was the brother of Charles II and later took the throne as James II. It shipped more African slaves to Americas than any other institution in the history of the transatlantic slave trade. Okay. All right. So yeah, that's how he got captured. Anyways, let's go back and continue. Ayuba subsequently convinced slave ship captain, a man named Pike, of his high social status and that they had previously met when Ayuba himself was selling slaves. Let me read that part again. I'm going to highlight that because, see, I want y'all to listen. Ayuba subsequently convinced slave ship captain, a man named Pike, of his high social status and that they had previously met when Ayuba himself was selling slaves, and explained his father was capable of paying ransom. Pike granted Ayuba leave to find someone to send word to Ayuba's family, since the messenger did not return in time. At the behest of Captain Henry Hunt, Pike's superior, Ayuba and Lome were sent across the Atlantic to Annapolis, Maryland, where he was delivered to another factor, Vachel Denton. Upon arriving in America, Diallo became known by the biblical translation of his name, Joe Ben Solomon. Now, I had to repeat that last part with the middle paragraph because that part is important. You gotta remember, see, people will say that, oh, our people sold us into slavery. Yes, we had those ancestors that did. And let me explain why. Let me explain why they did that. Give me a second. I don't know what just happened. Oh, Lord. Okay. Sorry about that. Let me explain why. See, people will quit to make the argument, oh, our people sold us into slavery, which, yes, that is true. There were those of our people that did play a part in slavery. But here's the reason why. Because at that time, they didn't use the concept of race as we know of it today, all right? They were going by tribes, all right? And not only they went by tribes, but they went by certain class of status. Because people like Ayuba, he represented a social high class status, all right? They were the ones that was at the higher rank selling their captives to the masters or to the Europeans, okay? And not only that, there were those who were selling individuals who were beneath them, who was in a lower rank, all right? So with that being said, these things was based on tribalism. All right. It was based on Mandingo going against the Fulani people or the Fulani people going against the Hausa people. You see what I'm saying? It wasn't that they didn't see each other as one, because they saw each other based on tribes. And if you was a captive, it don't matter if you even came from the same country or the same kingdom. If you came from a different tribe, you was going to be a captive in that tribe. So that means that one tribe catches you in their territory, they was going to capture you and hold you up for ransom until somebody gets you. Okay? So there was those who was sold into slavery by other tribes. And then again, as I mentioned, if you was in a higher status, in a higher rank, right, you had the ability to sell other people into slavery. Now, if you was in the lower rank, you weren't able to do anything because you didn't have that type of power or privilege to do so. Now, slavery happened throughout the world, okay? But the slavery that we know of, chattel slavery, is the one that we mostly experienced here in America. Our ancestors had to experience. So yes, if you study your genetics, if you study your genealogy, you may come to find out that not only you had relatives that were enslaved, but you had those who had slaves. You had those who sold slaves, okay? Even when you study furthermore into history, you're going to come to find out there were blacks who owned slaves. They just didn't make as much profit as their white counterparts did, but they owned slaves. Now, it's hard to digest. I know it's hard to get that into your system and to believe, but that's just what took place. See, we want to have it made up in our minds that, oh, it was just white people that just came in and took us out of our land and brought us over here to America. And it didn't work like that. It's called Atlantic Slave Trade for a reason. Because guess what? They were trading. There were Africans who was trading with the Europeans to bring us over here because they wanted merchandise. They wanted items. They was trading Africans or their captive for guns, for resources, all these different things. Okay? So at that time, they weren't thinking about race. They weren't thinking about, oh, we was all one because we all come from the same region. That wasn't their mentality. So that's why so many of us, when we take our DNA and we discover in our genetic, we come to find out that we come from a mixture of different tribes. Okay? You may come to find out that you may have some Fulani, Hausa, Mandika, the Wolof, Yoruba. You may come to find out you have so many of them mixed in. You wonder why? Because of the trade. Because not only because of trade, but because of the fact that there were different people that came from different tribes within West Africa bunched up together. All right? So that's the way they saw race. They saw race based on tribes. They didn't see race based on the color, okay? Or based on being from the same region. They saw it based on tribes. That's how they thought back then. Let's continue. And then, and also another thing about social status. Just because somebody was at a higher social status, that did not mean that they was exempt all the time. Now, they had thought they were exempt. So Ayuba and people like Abdul Rahman Ibrahim Sori, who was also in a social status, who was a prince of Guinea-Bissau, he happened to be enslaved as well. So anybody was at a risk of being caught up in the slave trade, whether they were rich or poor, whether they was a high priest or prince or a king or what, you was gonna be at an advantage. If the Europeans wanted to put you on that boat, they was gonna put your ass on the boat. All right, and that's what happened to Ayuba. He happened to tell him, "Look, I come from a social status. I'm in a higher rank. I was responsible for selling the slaves. Okay, we have met before." And he spoke to a man named Pike about this. He said, "We met before. We have worked together before. I shouldn't be here." But he ended up being a slave for 2 years in Maryland. But we're going to continue on with the story and see what happens next afterwards. All right. So it says, Ayuba was then purchased by Mr. Tosley of Kent Island, Maryland. Ayuba was initially put to work in the tobacco fields. However, after being found unsuitable for such work, he was placed in charge of the cattle. While in captivity, Ayuba used to go into the woods to pray. However, after being humiliated by a child while praying, Ayuba ran away in 1731 and was captured and imprisoned at the Kent County Courthouse. Unfortunately, Ayuba's rationale for escape was not understood until an African translator was located. Able to communicate his needs, Ayuba's owner set aside an area for undisturbed prayer upon the slave's return. It was at the courthouse that he was discovered by a lawyer, Reverend Thomas Blewett of the Anglican Society for the Propagation of the Gospel, traveling through on business. The lawyer was impressed by Ayuba's ability to write in Arabic in the narrative. Blewett writes the following: "Upon our talking and making signs to him, he wrote a line or two before us, and when he read it, pronounced the words Allah and Muhammad, by which his refusing a glass of wine we offered him, we perceived he was a Mohammedan, but could not imagine of what country he was or how he got thither. For by his favorable carriage and the easy composure of his countenance, we could perceive he was no common slave." All right, so another thing, Ayuba did not speak English. All right, he was a Muslim. He spoke Arabic. So Arabic is a common language, all right, within West African coast because of the Islamic practice. All right. So you're going to come to find out that there's a lot of people that's in West Africa that could speak Arabic along with speaking their colonial language and their tribal language as well. All right. So it says here he wrote in Arabic. All right. So he had to have an African translator to translate his thoughts, his words into English. Okay. So here we go. Oops. So let's read right here where it says, when another African who spoke Wolof, a language of a neighboring African ethnic group, was able to translate for him, it was then discovered that he had aristocratic blood. Encouraged by the circumstances, Mr. Tosley allowed Ayuba to write a letter in Arabic to Africa to send to his father. Eventually, the letter reached the office of James Oglethorpe, director of the Royal African Company. After having the letter authenticated by John Gainer, the Laudian chair of Arabic at Oxford, Oglethorpe purchased Ayuba for £45, I believe. So that's the British dollar. Okay. According to his own account, Oglethorpe was moved with segment upon hearing the suffering Ayuba had endured. Oglethorpe purchased Ayuba and sent him to London office of the Royal African Company in London. Blulet and Ayuba traveled to England in 1733. During the journey, Ayuba learned to communicate in English. However, emotionally swayed, his letters claim him to be. Oglethorpe was not so conscientious to leave instruction with the London office of the RAC, which is the Royal African Company, concerning what to do with Ayuba upon his arrival in late April 1733. Okay. It says Captain Henry Hunt, or perhaps his brother William Hunt, one of the original factors in charge of Ayuba's enslavement, arranged for lodging in a country province. Yet Ayuba heard rumors that Hunt was planning to sell him to traders who claimed they would deliver him home. Ayuba, fearing yet more trickery, contacted Blulet and other men who he had met en route to London. Blulet arranged for Ayuba's stay in Cheshunt and Hertfordshire. The RAC, following Oglethorpe's orders, made in part through persistent requests from interested men in London, subsequently paid all the expenses and purchase price of the bond for Ayuba. Ayuba beseeched Blulet once again, explaining that none of this secure he would not be enslaved once again. According to Blulet, all the honorable men involved had promised they would not sell Ayuba into slavery. So, though supposedly Ayuba was not under any threat, Blulet and other sympathizers paid £59, 6 shillings, and 11 pence half pennies simply to ease Ayuba's anxiety. Englishmen in London and surrounding province who had met Ayuba collected money so that his freedoms in form and official document seal made and sealed by the RAC. Blulet explained, Job's mind being now perfectly eased, he could fraternize with London's elite, obtaining many gifts and new friendships, while also being of service to Haynes Solon through his newly acquired ability to translate Arabic into English. His servant to Haynes Solon, including organizing the collection of Arabic manuscripts at the British Museum. While in England, Ayuba was in the company of many other prominent people, including the royal family and John Montagu, second Duke of Montagu, and his wife Mary, the Duchess of Montagu, which led him to being inducted into the Gentlemen's Society of Spain. Though in England, Ayuba continued to pray regularly and observe his Islamic beliefs. He was said to have copied by hand the Quran 3 times from memory. His acquaintance made effort to convert him to Christianity. However, gifting him an Arabic version of the New Testament, Ayuba was already familiar with the Christian belief system, agreeing with the role of Jesus as prophet, but he refuted the concept of the Holy Trinity. He considered his monotheistic perception of religion to be incapable with the Christian belief in the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Through intense research, Ayuba found the term Trinity is never mentioned in the New Testament. He also advised against assignment of human images to God's name. For this reason, displayed a particular disdain for Roman Catholicism and what he regarded as its characteristic worship of idols. So basically, Ayuba was promised not to be sold into slavery. Okay, they sent him over there to England to do some work, dealing with Arabic at the British Museum. But they was trying to get him to convert into Christianity, and he refused to give up his Islamic belief because he believed in the monotheistic of Islam. Now, for those that don't understand by Islam and their belief system, they believe in Allah, believe that Allah is the one and only creator. All right. And they believe that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which means may peace and blessing be upon him, is the last prophet of Allah. All right. Now, you have other Islamic groups out there, such as the Shiites and Sufi Muslims. All right. But in particularly, in this case, he happened to be a Sunni Muslim or Orthodox Muslim, because he only believed in Allah and he believed in Prophet Muhammad being a messenger of Allah. And there was nothing else behind him. He didn't believe in the Trinity. He even discovered that in the New Testament, there was no story of such about the Trinity, that the Trinity doctrine was just fabricated, made up. It was made up the whole entire time. So there was no such thing as the Trinity. He wasn't that easy to convince after all. All right. Now, it says in July of 1734, Ayubi freely returned to Gambia and later returned to his homeland. Of this, Reverend Thomas Bluelet's recaps. About the latter end of July last, he embarked on board one of the African company ship bound for Gambia, where we hope he is safely arrived, to the great joy of his friends and the honor of the English nation. Now, here it is. However, Ayuba was met with more of a grim reality. His father had died, and one of his wives, presuming that Ayuba had perished, had remarried. His homeland was ravaged by war, but being a prosperous individual, he was able to regain his old lifestyle. His memoirs were published by Bluelet in English and French. Ayuba was an extremely rare exception in the slave trade due to his intelligence and monetary prowess. He was able to escape legally the hardships of slavery and return home to Africa. Ayuba, however, faced later hardship. In June of 1736, he was in prison or held as a parolee by the French. Ayuba may have been targeted by the French because of his alliance with the British. He was held perhaps for a year by the French. When Ayuba's local countrymen secured his release, he later sent letters to the London RAC to be given transit to visit London, but this request was turned down. His death was recorded in the minutes of the Spalding Gentlemen's Society in 1773. Ayuba continued to press his acquaintance in London for Lumen's freedom. Due to Ayuba's commitment and the help of Bluelet, Lumen was eventually released from slavery and returned to Gambia region in 1738. All right. So he died in 1773. Okay. He died in 1773 at the age of 71 or 72. So it was interesting. It was very interesting that he did not go into the long-term effect of slavery like his other counterparts did, because he had the intelligence and the status to where he was able to be set free. Okay, he had strong connection. Even like his translator, he was able to be set free as well because of his strong ties and connection with those in the continent and elsewhere. Let me go ahead and see. It said, do you think his religious views stopped him from bonding with other outside of religion was like-minded? That's a good question. Do I think that? In some cases, maybe. Yeah, maybe it was the fact. I think it was more so his social status. I wouldn't say his religious views. I would think his status is the reason why that he didn't bond with others from the outside. So I would say it's social status versus religious views. So if I was to say that, it would probably be that first, then his ideology, his belief in Islam second. Yeah. You know, so, but again, everybody didn't have that privilege to get away from the bondage of slavery like he did. You know, he only served 2 years in America, but everybody didn't have that bondage. Everybody didn't have the privilege or the opportunity. Whereas Abdul Rahman Ibrahim Sore, he served 40 years as a slave, and he had a status, and he was Muslim. Okay, he had a high status. He was a prince. So again, you know, everybody didn't get that opportunity. But I would say that it was his social status that that kind of hinder or stop him from bonding with other outside of religion. That's what I think. All right. Let's go ahead and let's see if I can find some more information. All right, so I want to show you something else. Here it is on slaveryandremembrance.org by Ayuba Suleiman Diallo. Now, here is some memoir of the life of Joe, the son of Solomon, the high priest of Bunda in Africa. All right. By Thomas Blulet. So it says here, personal memories of slavery, slave narratives became more common in North America in the 19th centuries, but they are much rarer in earlier periods. Perhaps the most revealing of those early narratives is the memoir of Ayuba Suleiman Diallo of Bandu in today's Senegal, and who was better known as Joe Ben Solomon. An account of his remarkable life was published in London in 1734. And it says a Muslim of high rank, Diallo, was captured in 1730 on a trip to Gambia and sold to Stephen Pike, captain of Arabella. Diallo endured the Atlantic crossing aboard the Arabella and was one of the 150 survivors who landed in Annapolis, Maryland, after a passage of nearly 6 months. In Annapolis, he was purchased by a Mr. Tosley, who employed him as a slave in the tobacco fields in Kent Island, Maryland. Diallo escaped from the plantation and was captured and jailed. While he was in jail, it was soon clear to those around him that Diallo was an educated and devout man who was a literate and strictly observant Muslim. With the help of attorney Thomas Blulet of Maryland and James Oglethorpe, the founder of the colony of Georgia and director of the Royal African Company in London. Now, there is a college in Georgia that's named after James Oglethorpe. It's called Oglethorpe University, and it's located out in Chamblee, Georgia, I believe. Yeah, it's out in Chamblee, Georgia, which is like going up north. So, yeah, it's a college named after him, a university. I just wanted to put that out there. That's all. Yeah. Anyways, but we now know that his supporters in the Royal African Company had an ulterior motive in mind. The said Negro understands and write Arabic and may be of service to the company on giving him his freedom and sending him to Gambia. A company employee insisted. The company thus sent Diallo to England, where he was lionized in London society. He was even present at court before he was finally allowed to return to Africa 5 years after his initial enslavement in Gambia. He stepped ashore a free man. He was one of a very small handful of Africans who managed to return to their African homeland in the era of the Atlantic slave trade. Okay. All right. So, and you can check out more information. This is a good website right here. It's called slaveryandremembrance.org. All right. So if you want to know more about the slave trade and who was involved in it, as far as African Americans or African people is concerned, you're more than welcome to just go to this website. As a matter of fact, you can go to the history and memoir, what's the history and memory, culture and artifacts, people. It's so many lists of names that you'll find on here. Okay. All right. So also, I have another source right here, which comes from the National Humanities Center.org. National Humanities Center Resource Toolbox Becoming American, the British Atlantic Colonies, 1690 to 1763. A slave about 2 years in Maryland. All right, so it's giving account on his life, some of the memoirs and whatnot. So let's go down to here. Let's look at this real quick where it says section number 2 of the manner of his being taken captive and what followed upon it to his return. The excerpt. Capture in West Africa. In February 1730, Job's father, hearing of an English ship at Gambia River, sent him with 2 servants to attend him to sell 2 Negroes and to buy paper and some other necessities or necessaries, but desired him not to venture over the river because the country of the Mendigos, who are enemies to the people of Futa, lies on the other side. Job, not agreeing with Captain Pike, who commanded the ship lying then at Gambia, sent back the 2 servants to acquaint his father with it and to let him know that he intended to go farther. Accordingly, having agreed with another man named Lumen Laez, who understood the Mendigo language, to go with him as an interpreter, he crossed the river Gambia and disposed of his Negroes for some cows. As he was returning home, he stopped for some refreshment at the house of an old acquaintance, and the weather being hot, he hung up his arms in the house while he refreshed himself. Those arms were very valuable, consisting of a gold-hilted sword and gold knife, which they wear by their side, and a rich quiver of arrows, which King Sambo had made him a present of. It happened that a company of the Mendigos who lived upon plunder passing by at that time and observing him unarmed rushed in to the number of 7 or 8 at once at a back door and pinioned Job before he could get to his arms, together with his interpreter, who is a slave in Maryland still. They then shaved their heads and beards, which Job and his men resented as the highest indignity, though the Mendigos meant no more by it than to make them appear like slaves taken in war. On the 27th of February, 1730, they carried them to the Captain Pike at Gambia, who purchased them, and on the 1st of March, they were put on board. All right, so to go down where it says enslavement in Maryland, Mr. Vachil Denton sold Job to one Mr. Tosley in Kent Island in Maryland who put him to work in making tobacco, but he was soon convinced that Job had never been used to such labor. He every day showed more and more uneasiness under this exercise, and at last grew sick, being no way able to bear it, so that his master was obliged to find easier work for him, and therefore put him to send the cattle. Job would often leave the cattle and withdraw into the woods to pray, but a white boy frequently watched him and whistled he was at his devotion, would mock him and throw dirt in his face. This very much disturbed Job and added to his other misfortunes, all which were increased by his ignorance of the English language, which prevented his complaining or telling his case to any person about him. All right, so basically this article just pretty much lines up to what I was previously reading on Wikipedia, right? And so if you want to discover more information, all right, you can go ahead and read it for yourself. It's on nationalhumanities.center.org. A slave about 2 years in Maryland. So it's the memoir of Job, who is Ayuba. So Ayuba means Job in Arabic. All right. Real quick, let's talk about the concept of the beard for the men. So in Islam, for the men in their dress code, they have to, it's required of them to grow a beard. Now, some men can't grow beards, but if a man grows a beard, right, he cannot shave his beard off because that's a part of the sunnah, which is a part of the creed. So he cannot shave his beard off, and men have to like wear something that covers them from their navel to their knees. All right. So that means that when they wear their pants, sometimes you notice that Muslims wear their pants leg rolled up a little bit to their ankle because that's part of the sunnah. All right. So you will come to find out that you'll see a lot of men in Islam walk around with long beards, full beards, because in the Islamic culture, they're not allowed to cut their beards. They're not allowed to shave. They're not allowed to do that. All right. That's a part of the sunnah. So let's see, what else can we find here? What else can I find? Hey, brother Bakari. Hey, brother DMG. How you doing, brother DMG poet, the poet? Thank you. From Paradigm Shift TV. How you doing, brother? How you doing? Thank you. Thank y'all for coming in. Make sure y'all share this video if y'all get a chance to, please. Thank you so much. All right. Now let's look at another book right here. Okay. So this book is green for whatever reason. This book called Africa Remembered: Narratives by West African from the Era of Slave Trade, which was edited by Philip D. Curtin, with the introduction and annotation by Philip D. Curtin, G.I. Jones, Margaret Priestley, Ivor Wilts, A.P.C. Smith, D.M. Lass, and Gambo Jabal, P.C. Lloyd, J.F. Ade Ajayi. It was written in 1967. Okay. So we're going to go into the story, see if we can find more accounts about Ayuba Suleiman Diallo. All right, so here it is, chapter 1. And I'm going to pull this up a little bit. All right, if you guys can see that. So right here, it gives an account about his story, etc. So we're going to go down where it says, so much for a literary rendering. The real Ayuba Suleiman is a good deal more obscure, and the account of his life is somewhat garbled by his historians. Nevertheless, some of the myths can be dissipated by other evidence, and the picture that emerges is that of an 18th century Muslim African merchant, terribly well informed about his own country and its neighbors, and caught up in the maze of complex political and economic rivalries surrounding the slave trade of Senegambia. His account helps to fill out a historical framework otherwise based on French reports from the Upper Senegal and oral tradition recorded in the 19th century. Unlike most regions of West Africa, the Senegambia was not normally a significant source of slaves. The Europeans who had been trading on that coast since the 15th century went there for gum or Arabic, gold, hides, ivory, and beeswax, plus small numbers of slaves derived from the Wolof states south of the Senegal mouth and from the petty Malinke kingdoms scattered along either side of the Gambia. The products that determined commercial strategy before the 18th century were gold and gum, and the key to commercial geography was the pair of parallel and navigable rivers leading into the interior. Okay. Inter-European rivalries of the 17th century had shaken out by the 18th century into a relatively stable situation. The French normally dominated the trade of the Senegal. The English normally dominated that of the Gambia. Dutch ships, however, still traded from time to time along the open coast, especially the Mauritanian coast to the north of the Senegal. Portuguese, who had once dominated the European trade from both rivers, were now relegated to coastal trade and especially to the region south of Gambia. This distribution of strategic advantage gave the French traders a special position in the gum trade. The gum tree, Acacia Senegal, grows wild in the steppe country between the Sahara proper and the well-watered savanna of the Western Sudan. The most accessible supplies were those to the north of the Senegal, where nomadic Moors had long been accustomed to gather gum and prepare it for shipment. By the early 18th century, this source was responsible for the greater part of the gum entering world trade and was the essential to the growing European textile industry. With their domination of the waterborne trade of the Senegal, the French were able to monopolize the supplies of gum from the trading posts along the river, though they were forced to compete with other European merchants at the ports scattered along the Mauritanian coast between the Senegal and Cape Blanc. All right, and it says gold exports tended to be less valuable than gum, but Europeans were especially susceptible to the lure of gold. Both the French and the English regarded the Senegambia as potentially of the greatest. And then there's a map right here. Okay, as you can see. You see where it says Wolof, Moors. Importance if only they could find a secure route to the gold deposit, establish their control, and increase production. Most of the gold exported by way of the Senegambia originate in Bamboo and from alluvial workings along the Falime River, though some may have come from further east in Bure. They were therefore accessible along either of the two rivers, and both European nations had been jockeying for position in an on and off manner for many decades. The English had sent several expeditions as far as Barracuda Falls in 1618-22. Others went further in 1661 through 62, 1681, and 1723 to 1727, but no significant changes in the pattern of trade seem to have resulted. The English traded regularly as far as Barracuda Falls, but no higher. By the 1730s, the French appeared to be closer to success. They established a pattern of regular annual voyage of the Senegal to Gadiga in 1685, and these continue with only occasional periods of lapse. At the end of the 17th century, the French established a fortified post near the town of the Ramene, or was it the Ramene? Yeah, the Ramene. And in 1714, they returned and established Fort St. Joseph at Tambucane in 1725 and again in 1730. French travelers from the forts actually penetrated into Bambouk, and by 1734, their upriver establishment included some 44 Europeans. All right. So as we can see in the story, right, based on that book, now that book was written in 1967, okay, but the account's still relevant. So Gambia was ran by the Europeans, all right? They had that region on lock. And Senegal was ran by the French. So you had the conflict between the French and the British or the English people because over the resources in that area, right? So they was in competition. So these Europeans, they came over to Africa, right? But they were also in competition with each other. The Portuguese was in competition with the French, and the French was in competition with the British. And then, you had the Belgian people that came over. All right, so they was all in competition. They all wanted the resources. You got to know one thing. Africa is one of the richest continents, okay? The richest continent in the world. So Africa has a lot of natural resources. You talking about gold, you talking about coal mines, the material that is used to make batteries for your cell phones. And they also have diamonds. If you go to Sierra Leone, if you ever watch Kanye West's video, Diamonds Are Forever, and you see where he was in Sierra Leone, they were talking about blood diamonds. Yeah, they have all the resources there. That's a big continent, all right, with over 45 countries. That one big continent with all the resources, it attracts foreigners from other places from Asia and Europe. See, Europe don't have a lot of natural resources like Africa, all right? So that's why they came over there, to get those resources and to control the economy. But here's the thing, in order to control the economy, you have to find a way to control the people. And how do you control the people? You colonize them. And colonizing will means that you will have to enforce your languages upon them so they could be able to learn how to speak your language. You'll have to enforce your religious ideology and your political system to keep your economic under control. So that's why today you will find various countries in Africa that speaks English, French, Dutch, in some places Arabic, because of the trade and the invasion that took place, and also the colonialism. All right. So you're gonna all that comes along with the territory. So if somebody is an invader and they want to come into your land and take over your resources, right? In order to control your resources and control the economy, you have to learn how to control the people, to keep the people from being rebellious and keep the people from trying to take back their land. So that's what they did. They went on ahead and colonized the people so they can control the economics. Remember, slavery is about the economics. That's the main thing. It's about economics. It's about profiting. That was the main purpose of slavery, to gain profits. And of course, higher status, ranks, prestige. As my college professor used to say, power, wealth, and prestige. You got the power, meaning that you in control. You got the prestige, meaning that you got the ego, you got the confidence. And you're regarded as such. And the wealth is the main thing because you got the profiting. So these things are the key factor, but the one key factor, the main component of them all, is economics. It's the mean of production, the consumption, and most of all, the money. Yep, the money. And so when the Pan-African movement came about, all right, which the Pan-African movement, all right, was of course, it started by various brothers here in North America, but one of them who played the most important role was W.E.B. Du Bois. And the first conference they had was in England in the 1900s. All right. Because of the Pan-African ideology, right, it had brought a major influence to those in the West African region. People like Jomo Kenyatta and also Kwame Nkrumah. They were greatly influenced by the Pan-African ideology to where they were able to take over leadership in their own country. Emil Kabar, another one. So the Pan-Africanism have influenced these individuals to say, you know what, we got to take back our country. We got to take back our resources from these Europeans. Now, it cost them their life at the very end. It really did. It cost them their lives. But they put up a fight. It was worth the fight to gain the people back, to earn the people's trust so they can get their country running and back to where it needs to be. However, there's still the colonialism philosophy that's still there incorporated within West Africa, especially when it comes down to religion. Like, for example, let's take Nigeria. You got the southern part of Nigeria, which is Christianity, and you got the northern part of Nigeria, which is Islam. And they're going back and forth with each other because of these religion ideologies. Then you have to look at in Cameroon, where one part of Cameroon, I think is the northern part of Cameroon, they speak French, and the southern part of Cameroon, they speak English. But guess what? There's a conflict. So it's not so much about tribalism anymore. It's more so about religious ideology and political ideology. That's what it's really about. Because in some countries in Africa, they don't care too much for tribalism. They don't care too much about what tribe you come from. They're too busy trying to unite. They're too busy trying to focus on how they can come together and fight against a bigger machine, which is the Europeans and the Asians. Because, you know, the Chinese coming over there and taking over now. So you know, Africa is not the same Africa that it was before during the ancient time period with all the kingdoms and all the queens and all of that. No, because it has gone through its transition. After the transatlantic slave trade, it has gone through a serious transition. And it has been colonized, it has been invaded by foreigners. Let's see. But anyways, that concludes this video. And again, the name of this book right here is called Africa Remembered: Narratives by West African from the Era of Slave Trade. All right, so you can go to archive.org, which is the internet archive, and check out that information and look it up for yourself. Okay. All right, so anyways, that concludes this. And I thank you all for watching. I appreciate you guys. Okay, I'm back. All right, so as I was saying before, I appreciate you guys for watching. I appreciate you guys for tuning in as usual. And if you see the Cash App at the bottom, if you want to support what I'm doing and you want to contribute, donate, or whatever you want to do, you're more than welcome to do so. I really appreciate that a lot. That means a lot to me. Yes, coating is a cell phone material, but they also make the berry out the material as well. So it's a mine they have over in I think it's in the Congos. I think it's in Democratic Republic of Congo. Yeah, it's in the Congo where there's a material they use to make the berries for the cell phone as well. So oh yes, real quick before I close out, because I said I was going to show you guys some information, show you somebody who you can look up. All right, so I'm going to pull this brother up real quick. All right, hold on. I got something for you guys. All right, so the brother, his name is This brother right here. I got the video pulled up. So you guys should check him out. His name is all right. So you guys should check this brother out. His name is Brother Abdullah Hakim Quake. Brother Abdullah Hakim Quake is he's an Islamic scholar. Of course, he's an imam, but he goes into depth about Islam and slavery and history in Africa. So if you guys want to check him out, you're more than welcome. You can look it up on YouTube, or you can just type his name in the Google session. Abdullah Hakim Quick. That's his name. So he's an Islamic scholar, and he deals with history about Islam and slavery in Africa. And it's great information. He goes into depth and details about that. So I'm going to put his name up again right here. Just going to highlight it for you. All right, so you see that? That's the highlight right there. All right. Okay, then. So you guys, that's all I have for today. Now I can close out. And I hope you all have a wonderful day, a wonderful afternoon. Please take it safe. Please be easy. And just be careful of your surroundings. All right. And remember, knowledge is essential. So make it your duty to obtain information. All right. Thank you. All right, then.